My name is Sabreena Delhon, and I'm the CEO of the Samara Centre for Democracy.
Are you okay if I call you Sabreena?
Yeah.
Okay. Sabreena, if you could put into context the kind of research that you're doing here in terms of what politicians, political candidates are facing when it comes to online abuse.
Sure. So the purpose of the Samara Centre is to make it easier to talk about and participate in politics. And two ways that we do that is by looking at technology's influence on our democratic culture and also studying the lived experience of politicians. So what that means is we have one project called SAMBOT where we measure abusive content received online by candidates in Canadian elections. And we also have our long-standing MP exit interview project where we talk to former members of Parliament about their experience after they've left the role.
When it comes to online abuse, what are you hearing and seeing from elected officials about what they're experiencing?
So we've been carrying out exit interviews with former members of Parliament for over a decade. And a key trend in our review of over 160 interviews to date now is that online abuse is increasingly prevalent. Technology is having a massive influence on our democracy, and one way that manifests is through online abuse becoming a condition of work for elected officials in Canada. And it's important for us to understand that it's not just high profile or very established politicians that are going to get abuse online. First-time candidates are going to get it as well. And this shapes the health of our democracy in Canada, and it has a real toll on the representation and participation in our politics.
I want to pick up on something you said. You said a condition of work. Can you elaborate on that?
We use that language intentionally because when people talk about politicians, there is an inhuman lens that they apply to that. This is someone who's seeking attention, limelight, money. Those are the stereotypes around a political figure. But we know through our interviews that these are people who are looking to solve problems, contribute to their communities, and they take public service very seriously. One of the reasons why abuse received by politicians is so wildly unchecked is because our understanding of what it is as a job is fairly loose. And if you think about how other sectors approach getting, the best or, top talent, they think about things in terms of recruitment and retention. The conditions of work right now, if you want to seek elected office, entail a high volume of abuse that will be quite severe. And so we need to think about this as conditions of work so that we can bring this conversation down to earth. These are people who are elected to serve our interests. They're meant to serve the public. What conditions do you want your representative working under so that they can do their best for you?
Can you talk a little bit in terms of the increase of abuse that they're experiencing and what does that abuse look like?
Sure. So we have seen many pro-democracy aspects of social media platforms over the last decade, but increasingly these platforms are being used to push people away instead of drawing them in. And when we talk about abusive content that we've seen online, that we've measured and monitored, we're talking about death threats, we're talking about material that is misogynistic and very personal, and we're also talking about material that doesn't warrant being blocked or reported, but is coming at such intense volume. So imagine if every day you're receiving hundreds, maybe even thousands of tweets telling you that you're dumb and fat. That is going to wear you down over time. And that is what we hear in our interviews as well. The stuff that gets blocked and reported, it's easy to kind of have a line and understand that that's wild and it needs to be handled in a different way. But that insidious material about who you are personally, what you look like, it has nothing to do with your policies, for instance, really wears people down. And another aspect to this is in federal and provincial contexts, there's a party that can be a source of guidance or structure or support. But for local politicians, they're largely facing this on their own. and the material they receive can frequently be from members of their own community.
When an elected official or a candidate running for office is subject to this kind of constant barrage of online abuse, how does that impact our democracy? What happens?
So this is going to affect not only who runs in politics, but who stays. And then this is content that is largely public. We all see it, so then it has a chilling effect on the electorate more broadly. We have to understand that political life is not just offline anymore. I think we understand that the digital world is a real space, and violence occurring in a digital format is still violence. And so we're facing such complex challenges right now with our democracy related to trust, risk, and information. And we need to be responsive to these realities of what it's really like to be an active citizen offline and offline, because there's a connection. And the reality is people don't feel safe performing these roles. And if people don't feel safe performing them, then they're not going to step forward. Or increasingly, we'll be attracting people who also want to facilitate this type of violent and uncivil behavior, which is going to have a very corrosive and damaging effect on the practice of our politics in Canada.
So what do we do with that?
So we have to make for healthier working conditions, and that starts with evolving the culture in which our representatives are working within. But we also need to look at social media platforms and hold them to a higher level of accountability. Right now, platforms are incentivized to amplify and accelerate the distribution of harmful content in a way that's out of proportion to what's happening in real life. In one of our studies, we analyzed tweets received in the Toronto by-election. And one of our key findings was that it's a handful of accounts that are responsible for the abuse that we're seeing online. We had about 30 accounts producing 10% of the abuse that we tracked. So this matters because it's a small group, a handful of accounts that's having this outsized effect on how we understand our politics, how we understand and perceive the health of political conversations online. So we need to see social media platforms held to account in this regard. Right now, they're increasingly opaque, which makes researching them very difficult. They have actually been quite antagonistic towards charitable civil society organizations. They don't want people to know what they have in terms of data and the way in which they're using that towards anti-democratic ends.
What about elected officials in terms of how they may contribute to online harms, online abuse? Because there are some who will say their colleagues across the aisle are just as bad as someone out there that they don't know in terms of what they're doing to them online.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think one aspect of what's happening right now is called affective polarization. So this is when social media platforms are sharing content that is divisive, that's normalizing cynicism, violence, and a really short cycle in terms of communication. It's very reactive. And so we're seeing that play out in the way our elected officials are communicating and working with each other. It's affecting their conditions of work. And they are also then incentivized to behave in this way. The rewards for good behavior right now are not really being appreciated or understood or underscored. So we are seeing politicians use question period, for instance, to obtain content that they can use to share on social media. And it has increasingly become more about personal attacks than about policy discussions. And the effect on the public is that it pushes everybody away. They know what's going on here. They know that it's a short-sighted, election-oriented conversation, that it's not in the public's interest to behave this way. And it takes a toll to exist and work in this type of environment. Is not healthy for anyone. It's certainly not healthy for people who are behaving in this way either.
I guess finally, Sabreena, in terms of what would be your biggest concern or fear or something you'd like to flag when it comes to the political sphere and online harms and where we're headed and that impact on democracy?
You know, I noted that municipal politicians have told us that a lot of the abuse they receive can come from within their own communities. But at that local level, we have also found evidence in our research that points to foreign interference in our local politics. So we have to understand that what we're contending with here exists beyond our borders. It's coming from beyond our borders. There is a foreign interference aspect to this. We are so fortunate in Canada to have the democracy that we do, and that can lead us to feeling a little bit complacent. This is an opportunity for us to bring some courage and ambition to how we protect our democracy in Canada. It's not something static. It's not something that we have to, admire a golden age that existed in the past. We can be very mindful and intentional about how we want our democracy to evolve for the 21st century, and it's imperative because if people aren't representing and participating and actively involved in it, it won't function. And so timing is of the essence. This is an urgent crisis, and it needs to be addressed at a cultural, systemic, and policy level, and that's well within reach. We can look at how the world of work has transformed and find some healthy practices of work to apply within political structures, and we can also look to how other countries have addressed the online harm aspect and put social media companies in check so that they are adhering to our pro-democracy expectations and values.